I woke up the next morning at around 9:30. For some weird reason, I struggled to get to sleep, so I had a pretty bad night. I got dressed in some old blue jeans, a black t-shirt, and some ankle boots. Today I was going to take it a little easy. I wasn't going to be sitting in the living room and watch the undead go past, though. I was going to go next door to my old neighbor's house to see if there was anything useful, e.g. food, water, medicine, weapons, maybe some clothes, I don't know. I'm not going to let Strange come and loot her house. If I did it, then the stuff would be looked after and wouldn't go far from her house. After I finished getting dressed, I walked slowly down the stairs and went straight to the back door. I grabbed my baseball bat just in case and my door keys. Quickly but quietly, I opened my back door, then stepped out, locking it behind me. There were no biters nearby, and I couldn't hear any of them either. Good. I jumped over the wall that divided our backyards, then went straight to the back door of my neighbor's house. I tried to open it, but it was locked. "Oh, come on," I exclaimed in annoyance, then stepped away. I'm not going to her body to get the key. Perhaps it could be on the ground somewhere, I thought to myself, and started to search the yard for any kind of a key. I looked in between the stone flags that were placed all on the ground without luck. Sadly. However, something next to one of the flower pots caught my eye. I crouched next to them and my eyes went wide when I saw a small silver key. "Yes," I exclaimed and picked it up. It had to be the one for her door. Keys don't grow on trees and they don't fall out of the sky. I clenched my fist around the key, keeping it safe in my hand, then stood up with my baseball bat in my other hand. From the other side of the small wall that marked the end of my neighbor's garden came a saddened and dead moan. I jerked my head up to see a biter stood hunched over with his bloody mouth wide open. My eyes went wide as he held up his arms, trying to get to me. He quickly stared at me, and I cried out in surprise and jumped back. He was moaning and hissing at me and still trying to get to me, but the wall kept him back. I sighed again, silently thanking the wall, and I held up my baseball bat. "I'm busy, sorry," I said and swung at his head. His skull smashed and he fell to the ground with a thump. I then flicked off some excess blood from my baseball bat and turned to walk back to the door. The key fit perfectly, and after turning it in the lock a little, I finally got the door open. The kitchen was old-fashioned with pine wooden cupboards, an old gas cook, and a small white fridge that was slightly grubby. There were old tiles with flower bouquets on them around the white metal sink and cooker. The walls were a calm cream color, and the floor was wooden that was slightly darker than the cupboards. I didn't talk to my neighbors a lot, but I knew that she lived alone with her little dog. The dog didn't know where he was. Maybe I could find him and look after him. It would give me something to do, and it's the least I could do for my neighbor. I found a few plastic bags in a drawer next to the sink, and I filled them with as many tins and packets of food that I could find. I got lots of water bottles from the fridge and cupboards as well. I ended with 6 bags full. I carried them 3 bags in each hand with a happy and satisfied smile on my face. I turned to the door and was about to open it and leave when I was stopped by a smell. I sniffed a couple more times, then turned my head slowly to the left to see next to the hob and down to see in his little bed my neighbor's dog. Dead. He wasn't breathing or moving, and the smell was coming from him. I slowly turned the rest of me to face him, and felt tears prickle in the corners of my eyes at the sight of the little brown dog. He was only young and loved his owner so much. I couldn't help but cry at the sight of him like this. After crying for a little longer, I wiped my eyes and stood up again. I then decided that I couldn't leave him here. He needed to be buried because the smell of meat could maybe attract scavenging animals, and he didn't deserve to rot here. I got his place. A gray paw print blanket and wrapped the little dog up in it. Then carrying him in my arms, I took him outside. I hopped over the wall to my back door with the dog still in my arms. I unlocked my back door to grab my handgun and a small green trowel. My dad kept in a drawer, then left again. As I walked with my hands full down my garden, I glanced up at the sky to see that it was gray and started to rain a little. I wasn't going to let that stop me. I walked out of the small metal gate at the bottom of my garden, then out to the garden of my neighbor. Like my garden, it went down a slightly steep hill, and that had plants and bushes on it, and grass at the bottom of it. That would be perfect for him to lie and sleep happy. I quickly started to dig with my dad's trowel, and had my handgun next to the dog wrapped up in the blanket. After about 5 minutes, it was 1/3 of a meter deep, when there was the sound of dragging footsteps and moans of a biter. I looked up to see it was an old female in a blouse and trousers. Her short white hair was blood-spattered and dirty, and she also still had her glasses on that were smashed. Some of the shards of glass here in her cloudy dead eyes. I sighed and picked up my handgun with my slightly muddy hand and aimed it at her head. I took in a breath, then shot a single bullet in her head. She fell like a rock to the ground, and it was silent again. I sighed and put my gun down on the grass, then rested on my knees and wiped my hands on my thighs, leaving dirt stains on my trousers. I then turned to pick up the dog, then place him into the pit. He was just a blanket bundle, but he was covered, which was important. I then slowly started to fill the pit with dirt again. As I worked, the sound of rumbling thunder was heard in the distance. The rain had started to pour down now, and it was splashing ugly onto my face and hands, giving me goosebumps and cold shots through to my spine. The freshly dug soil had started to become a little muddy, and it had become dark with the water. Soon I finished filling it in, and I carefully smoothed the earth over the top. I then stood up with my handgun in one hand and the trowel in the other. I then slowly walked out of my neighbor's garden and back to her house. I grabbed the bags and returned to my house. I nearly dumped them on the floor and started to wash my hands with loads of soap and warm water in the sink. I had to get my hands clean, I just had to. I eventually did get them clean after 10 minutes of scrubbing. Then I dried them with a dish towel and looked down at the food bags. Day 5, and I buried my neighbor's dog after I stole from her kitchen. I hope doesn't come back to haunt me. This was one of those rare moments where she saw emotion in Shane. It was not the emotion she wanted to see, though. Shane. Let go, Emily said in a shaky voice. Eventually, Shane let go of her arm. Emily ran inside, not wanting to spend another minute with him. Unfortunately, she bumped into the last person she wanted to see. Eric gripped onto both of her arms tightly. Emily could feel his warm breath against her face. Her heart began to beat faster and faster as he stared deep into her brown eyes. Emily began to shake like a dog in fear. There was something about him that was not like most people. "Where do you think you're going, Missy?" said Eric. His voice sounded dark as he spoke. Emily tried to pull away, but he just gripped on tighter. Where was Sam? Was she in class already? Emily's breathing began to quicken. She wanted to get away from Eric as soon as possible, but she knew that she would be unable to do that without Sam's help. "Let go," Emily said. Eric laughed but did not release his grip on her. He pushed her against the wall and looked up and down her body. A smile began to curve on the side of his lips. Why weren't the teachers doing anything to stop him? Why wasn't he expelled? She looked around but noticed that no one was watching them, even thought that was what most people did during fights. In the distance, Emily thought she heard someone say her name. She turned her head and saw Sam running towards her at full speed. "What was going on, Sam?" said Emily. Emily felt like she was in a storm. She felt dizzy and couldn't focus on anything. Emily felt her arms being released from a tight grip and found Eric on the floor in a ball. When she looked up, she noticed there was someone else in front of her. She just couldn't tell who it was. Sam began to shout Emily's name over and over again. Emily's body grew stiff. She couldn't feel her knees, but she soon found herself falling to the floor and not being able to get up. Emily woke up to the sound of heart monitor next to her. She looked to her right and saw the limes, meaning that her heartbeat was at a steady pace. That was good. Emily sat up and looked around the room. She was in a hospital room. Emily saw Sam and Anna sitting on a bench inside the room. Both Anna and Sam were asleep when she awoke. Emily wondered how she got to the hospital in the first place. She couldn't remember anything that happened before the hospital. Emily looked at Anna and Sam and said, "Mom? Sam?" said Emily. Immediately, Anna and Sam woke up. They ran up to her and gave her a huge hug. Anna smiled at her and said, "We have come to the decision that we will move." Emily's eyes grew white in shock. She did not expect to hear Anna say that. She thought they were going to stay for a week. Though she did like the idea at first, now she wasn't so sure. She needed to read the journal more and explore the mansion, although maybe it may be best to move, after it was what she had wanted. Wasn't it? "When will we be moving?" asked Emily. "Does tomorrow sound good?" Emily nodded. She was so excited to move. She was afraid of the mansion and wanted to feel safe again. "Am I leaving the hospital today?" asked Emily. "Yes, you are. At least if you feel better," said Anna. Emily nodded, wanting to get out of the hospital. Even though she had only been there for a short time, she wanted to get out. She hated being stuck in the hospital. The last time she was at a hospital was when she was 5 and broke her leg. That was when her father was normal and did not have a lot of anger issues. Anna rubbed her leg and said, "I'll tell the doctors you're ready to leave." Anna and Sam left the room, leaving Emily alone. She laid back and attempted to relax. Emily groaned, knowing that she couldn't relax. It was hard for her to do that in hospitals. Hospitals always stressed Emily out. Emily stared at the ceiling and thought about the boys she met at school. The thought drifted to Shane. She wondered if he was okay and if Eric was bullying him. Shane's blue eyes were very beautiful. It went well with his blonde hair. He looked very good in white. Emily shook her head and tried to get them out of her head. Emily's heart skipped a beat when she heard the door open. She expected it to be her mom, but when it wasn't, she wanted him to go away. It was Shane at the door. Why was he there, and how did he get in there in the first place? Shane looked exhausted. His blue eyes looked grayer, which was quite odd. His blonde hair was messy, and he looked very pale. "What are you doing here, Shane?" asked Emily. Shane stepped further into the room and closed the door behind him. He walked over to the front of Emily's bed. His skinny fingers were intertwined with each other's as he stood. He held a blank expression on his face, like always. He was completely emotionless. "You can't leave, Emily. They won't let you," Shane said. Emily tilted her head to the side in confusion. What was Shane talking about? She had to leave. The mansion was scaring her, and she did not want to feel afraid for the rest of her life. "What do you mean by they?" asked Emily. Shane was suddenly close up to Emily's face. He grabbed her cheeks and looked into her eyes. His hands were cold, unlike Eric's hands, which were unnaturally warm. His were unnaturally cold. "You can't leave. Tell me you won't leave." Emily gasped when she found Shane on top of her. It was so sudden. He made a swift movement like he was flying in the air. Emily winced when he landed on top of her. She tried to push him off, but couldn't. Why did all of the boys she met at the school attack her? At least John didn't attack her. Shane was too heavy for her to push off. Emily's face began to burn as she tried pushing him off. Shane leaned in close to her face. Emily could feel his cold breath against her. Their faces were inches apart from each other. Emily had never been this close to a boy. Her heart began to beat fast while he lay on top of her. Emily noticed his eyes were wide with fear. Why was he afraid? "Please don't go," he cried. Emily's heart raced inside her chest. Why did he want her to stay? Shane turned his head to the sound of the door opening, and then he was gone. Like he wasn't even there. Anna smiled and said, "Time to go." Emily looked around the room, wondering where Shane was. She sighed and laid her head back down, feeling confused about everything. Emily walked into her room and over to her closet. She pulled off all of the cloths that hung on the hangers and put them in her suitcase. She then went over to her dresser that was near the closet and put them in her suitcase also. Emily was thrilled that they were leaving very soon. She did not want to stay in the mansion any longer than she had to. Anna had told her that they were moving closer to the school and would be living in a smaller house. Anna showed her pictures of the new house before they started packing. It was an adorable house. It had 3 bedrooms, 3 full bathrooms, a backyard and a front yard and 1 study room. It was a perfect house. She liked the fact that there were bathrooms in each bedroom. Emily's family had only moved once, and that was at the mansion. The minute they moved to New York, Emily knew something was very wrong. Emily's heart skipped a beat when the door opened. She expected it to be Sam or her mom, but it wasn't. It was Eric. How was he even able to get inside the house? Wasn't it locked? Something did not seem right. Emily walked to the back of the room to stay away from him. He attacked her and she did not want to be near him. "Emily," as Eric spoke, he stepped closer into the room. Emily held up her hands and said, "Don't come any closer, Eric." Eric sighed and stayed where he was. When Eric looked at her, his eyes seemed to glow the color gold. She remembered them glowing gold in the lunchroom. Maybe it wasn't the lighting. Maybe it was something else. Why were his eyes glowing? "Emily, you can't go," said Eric. At this statement, Emily laughed. Why did the boys not want her to move? She couldn't understand that. They were not friends with her anyway, and she was moving closer to the school, so they should be happy about that. When she had stopped laughing, Emily said, "Why? Tell me why I can't move, Eric. You attacked me and tried to flirt with my sister, so tell me why I shouldn't move." Eric sighed and said, "This house, it can't be left alone." Emily raised an eyebrow at him and said, "Why?" She placed her hands on her hips and waited for an answer. "You saw the blood and the bones, right?" Emily nodded but wondered how he knew about the blood and the bones. Emily's heart began to beat faster when he spoke. She wanted him to leave, but she had a feeling he was not going to leave anytime soon. How did you know? Eric looked at the ground and turned toward the door. Emily stepped forward and said, You didn't answer my question. Eric turned his head towards Emily and said, You just can't go. With that, he left the room, leaving the door open. Emily walked over to her bed and sat down. She pulled out the journal and opened to the page that her and Sam left off on. The words began to move around, but she was able to focus enough so that she could point out some words. She saw the description of the David Star and how it represented the men of the night. The leaf represented men with wings like angels. Finally, the crescent moon represented men who turned to wolves. She closed the book and put it in her suitcase. When the door opened, Emily jumped. Who could be at the door this time? Thought Emily. She looked at the door where saw Sam standing in the doorframe. Sam smiled and said, Ready to leave? Emily looked at her suitcase and then back at Sam. Should they really leave? Emily started regretting the idea of leaving. Both Eric and Shane told her not to leave. They never explained why, though. She wished they were just clear in what they were trying to say. Emily sighed and said, Yes. She grabbed her suitcase and walked out of the room. When Sam and Emily walked downstairs, Emily heard voices in her head. She stopped walking to hear what they were saying. You're going to regret this. She shook her head, ignoring the voices, and continued to walk down the stairs. At the bottom of the stairs, Emily stopped walking and looked back. She saw something she did not expect to see. She saw a huge dog with silver fur. The teeth were white, sharp and big. Its eyes were gold, like Eric's. The tail was about 2 inches around and 2 feet long. The body was probably 3 feet around and 5 feet long. Its paws were about the size of an apple. Emily screamed and ran for the door. When Sam turned her head to see why Emily screamed, her mouth dropped and she stood there, frozen in place. Anna ran inside to see what was going on. She shrieked and then yelled, Sam, what the hell are you doing? Run! It was too late, though. By the time Emily ran back inside, she saw the dog bite Sam. Sam screamed and began to hit the vicious dog. Drool fell onto Sam's face from the dog's mouth as it held her by the waist. The dog seemed to be staring into Emily's eyes. It glared at her and growled as it held Sam. I told you, you would regret it. Emily gasped when she heard the voice. She looked at her mom and said, Mom, I need you to go to the car and stay there. She looked at the dog and said, I have plan. Anna nodded and ran to the car. Emily walked up the stairs towards the creature. Her legs shook with each step. Her raced inside her. However, she was able to look calm as she did this. She needed to be calm in order for her plan to work. Emily knew Sam would die if she didn't do something quick. Emily stopped walking halfway up the stairs. She looked straight into the dog's eyes that stared into hers. Eric, said Emily. The dog growled when she said the name Eric. He bit harder onto Sam's waist while they stared at each other. Sam screamed and tried to pull away from the dog bite, but the dog only bit harder. Emily let out a breath and said, Eric, let Sam go. This is between you and me. Now drop her! They stared at each other for quite some time without speaking. Finally, the dog let go of her. Then, without a warning, he jumped over both of them and ran out the door. Sam's breathing grew heavy when Emily ran over to her. She couldn't believe Eric was that dog. At least that was what she assumed. He nearly killed Sam. He almost killed her own sister. Emily began to cry because she felt overwhelmed. Her sister almost died. Emily wouldn't know what to do without Sam in her life. She felt someone touch her shoulder and looked up to find her mom with her and Sam. Sam moaned on the floor in pain and curled into a ball. Mom, Emily whispered. She looked at her sister lying down on the floor. Her waist was bloody and the blood dripped onto the floor. Emily crawled over to her sister and lifted her shirt. Her waist was full of teeth marks. Emily gasped and hid in her mother's chest. Anna's body began to shake while Emily was in her arms. Both of them were crying. Emily could feel her mother's tears running down her neck, but she didn't care. All she could think about was Eric, trying to kill her sister. It was Eric, Mom, Emily said in between breaths. Eric did this? What about that dog who was just here? Asked Anna. Anna suddenly looked serious when she spoke. Changing the subject, she said, Emily, call 911. Eric must be arrested at once. The home phone is hanging above the kitchen sink. Emily did as she was told. Though it was hard to find the 3 simple numbers, she eventually was able to call the police. Emily told them everything that had happened once they picked up. The only part she left out was the fact that Eric had turned into a dog. She knew the police wouldn't believe her, so instead of a dog almost killing her sister, it was a man with a gun who shot Sam in the waist. Emily hung up the phone and ran back to her family. Eric had to be arrested, otherwise he might kill someone like their father. Emily walked inside the school once her mother dropped her off. Sam was in the hospital, so she was now alone at school. She looked down at the ground, not wanting to make any eye contact with people. Emily wished everything would go back to normal, but she knew that would never happen. Maybe things would have been different if Emily wouldn't have met John, Eric, or Shane. The police came right away after she told them about Eric. However, they did not believe her. They came anyway, so they could send Sam to the hospital. No adults believe children, Emily realized. Unless a child had evidence, the police wouldn't believe the child. The only reason the police barely believed her was the wound on Sam's waist. Emily found it annoying how adults don't typically believe in the things that children tell them. They think they just have a crazy imagination and won't take them seriously. That was one of the reasons why she did not tell them about Eric. She also did not tell them because the thing that happened to Eric was not normal. It wasn't normal. Emily opened her locker and grabbed the Animal Farm book and her notebook. When she closed her locker, Shane was leaning against the other lockers in front of her. He had his arms crossed and a smirk on his face. At last, she saw emotion on him again. She wondered what the smirk was there for, which kind of scared her. However, on the inside of Emily's stomach, it felt like butterflies swimming around her. She couldn't help it. Emily always felt this way around Shane, and she found it really irritating. "What do you want, Shane?" asked Emily. She couldn't help but feel extremely nervous around him. She did not know why. Emily knew he had secrets and wasn't spilling them. Everyone was keeping secrets from her. Her mother was, Eric was, John was, and Shane. They were all keeping secrets. Even Sam was keeping secrets from her. She just knew it. Emily looked at his shirt and saw that the top 2 buttons were unbuttoned. His hairless chest made it hard for her to focus. Emily noticed his blonde hair was brushed back and it smelled like he put on cologne. "What? No thank you for saving your life?" he asked. Emily rolled her eyes and said, "What are you talking about? I saved you from Eric 2 days ago. He looked like he was going to kill you." Emily frowned and looked down at the ground. So it was Shane who saved me, thought Emily. Emily cleared her throat and said, "I can take care of myself, but thank you for saving my life." Shane let out a breath of annoyance and walked away. Emily frowned and ran to catch up with him. She didn't know why she even bothered to try to catch up with him. Emily noticed that he was walking surprisingly really fast. Perhaps it was speed walking. That would be what most people would say. Emily had a feeling it was something more than speed walking. "Where are you going?" asked Emily suddenly. Shane stopped walking when she asked that question. He turned his head towards Emily and said, "I'm heading to English. Can't be late." Emily didn't mean to ask that question. She should have known that was where he was heading. Emily's cheeks became bright red when she realized how absurd that question was. She regretted asking it. Shane sighed and said, "I know you have questions, so we should head outside to talk about them." He walked towards the outside doors and said, "Are you coming?" Emily ran to catch up to him. He held out his arm and she took it without hesitation. His arm was cold like his hands and his breath. She wondered why that was. Shane pulled open the door and walked towards the bushes near the dump. Emily remembered Eric and Shane talking about different types of blood. That was a strange conversation to listen to. Shane let go of Emily's arm and walked forward, brushing his hands through his hair. "I don't want to do this." "But you know too much, and by law we must do this," said Shane. Emily began to back away from him. This was another language to her, and she did not understand what Shane was talking about. She was getting scared and wanted to run away, but for some reason she wasn't able to leave Shane. Shane looked up at her with wide eyes. Emily noticed red starting to replace the blue in his eyes. "Promise me you won't run. It will make everything a lot easier," said Shane. Automatically, Emily nodded. Even though she was terrified Emily didn't run away, she couldn't run away. She needed to see what Shane was talking about. "You have the journal, right?" he asked, sounding urgent. Emily nodded again, too afraid to speak. Ever since she found it, Emily brought it with her everywhere. For some reason, she couldn't put it down. She was able to read the pages, it was just hard for her, and it took longer than most people. "Get it out," Shane demanded. Emily immediately pulled out the journal and gave it to him. She stopped for a minute, but eventually gave it to him with shaky hands. Why should she listen to Shane? After all, he and Eric were the ones who made her go to the hospital. "What are you going to do?" asked Emily. "You will find out once you have turned. Please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be," said Shane. Emily sighed and watched them as he flipped through the pages. Once Shane stopped at a certain page, he was suddenly in front of Emily. They were only a few inches apart from each other. Emily could feel his cold breath against her face. Shane grabbed her right wrist and turned it so that her palm was facing towards the sky. He sighed and pulled out a small silver dagger with the David star on the handle. Emily sucked in her breath and wondered what he was going to do. "If you don't move, it won't hurt," said Shane. Emily tried to pull away from Shane's grasp, but he only gripped on tighter. She began to feel dizzy and the world started to spin around her. What was going on? Shane let out a breath and touched the tip of the dagger on her wrist. Emily began to shriek until he squeezed tighter and said, "Don't move and don't scream. It will make it worse." Emily bit her lip to stop the noise that wanted to come out of her mouth. Emily looked down at her wrist and noticed Shane was sketching the David star. Her heart beat rapidly inside her chest as she watched him sketch out the star. When Shane was finished, he placed the tip of the dagger on the ground in between their feet. Suddenly, an orange circle of flames circled around them where they stood. Emily noticed the David star that Shane drew was not bleeding. The only red that was visible was the outline of the star. When Emily looked up at Shane, his eyes were bright red. He looked hungry. Emily somehow knew that if she ran away, something terrible would happen. The law states that the innocent blood that has even the smallest amount of night blood must be turned. If the innocent has seen too much, they must also be turned, said Shane. Shane looked at Emily and frowned. Emily could tell by the look on his face that Shane did not want to follow whatever the law was. However, he had no choice. She could tell by the urgency and fear in his voice. "Emily, I don't want to do this to you, but you have night blood. I can guarantee it. Your father passed down marked blood. It has always been in your genes. Whether it be any creature of the other side, you have marked blood." Suddenly, Shane's teeth became sharp like a dog's canine. He gripped onto Emily's left wrist and leaned his head forward. Emily's breathing began to quicken as she watched him do this. His lips pressed against her lips, and she found out that surprisingly they were soft and warm. They were the warmest part of his entire body. "I'm sorry, Emily, but I have no choice." With that, his lips touched Emily's wrist gently, and he bit down on her wrist. It did not take long for her to realize that her heartbeat had disappeared. Emily's eyes flew open when she smelled an unfamiliar scent. Her stomach began to growl when she pulled herself off of the floor. Emily placed her hand on her stomach and spun around in circles, wondering where she was. She began to sniff around, to find the smell that was haunting her and making her stomach growl. Then it was like her feet controlled her body. She found herself running, more like sprinting at an unnatural speed, towards the strange smell. Emily gasped when she hit an object. She felt around for something to pull open and found a handle in her hand. Her hands were shaking as she pulled the drawer open. Emily's stomach growled again and she groaned in annoyance. Once the drawer was opened, Emily grabbed the first thing she touched. It felt like there was some sort of liquid inside a plastic bag. She brought it to her teeth and ripped a hole inside the bag. She heard something spill onto the ground, and before it could make a mess, she sucked on the bag. Inside the bag, she found something sweet and salty. It was the best thing she ever tasted. It was also the strangest thing she ever tasted. The liquid was warm, like it was freshly made, and soothed her growling stomach, making it silent. She sighed and dropped the bag on the floor. She wanted more of that strange, amazing liquid. She wondered if there was any more. I see you're finally awake. Usually it takes 3 years minimum for a newborn to awake. Emily spun around in circles, wondering where the voice was. When she turned to a corner, she found a gray, mysterious figure at the opposite side of the room. For some reason, she was able to see the figure. Only she couldn't really see it clearly. By the way the figure was standing, arms to the side, and in open posture, Emily assumed it was someone young, and probably around her age. Emily gasped when she felt the wind move her hair. She could feel and smell cold air against her face as she stood. The figure rushed past her, and suddenly there was light. Emily gasped and covered her arms. As soon as the lights were on, her whole body shook. She was having a hard time steadying herself. Emily looked away when Shane cleared his throat. John blinked a couple of times and walked over to Shane. Shane crossed his arms and tapped his foot impatiently. What was up with him? Emily rolled her eyes and walked over to the both of them. She looked at both of them and said, "So, how do we get to your master, Shane?" Shane and John were still eyeing when she asked the question. Emily groaned and elbowed Shane in the arm. Shane looked at Emily and said, "Right. The reason why we have John here is because we need a portal." Emily tilted her head to the side in confusion. Why would they need a portal? Wasn't it in New York? Seeing the confusion in Emily's eyes, Shane said, "The other side is in a different dimension of Earth. My master lives in Ilela. We need a ferry to travel to the other side because ferries are the only ones who can create a portal." John looked at Emily and said, "You read the journal right?" Emily nodded her head and said, "Yes, but not the entire book. It takes me a long time to read because I have dyslexia." Both John and Shane laughed her statement. Emily glared at them and crossed her arms. Why were they laughing at her? Dyslexia was a serious thing, and it made it hard for her to do school. She needed more time than most people to do her homework, and it took hours to read. She still hadn't learned to control her dyslexia. It was very difficult. Emily wished they would just stop laughing at her. It was kind of embarrassing, and she did not want to be humiliated. No one wants to feel that way. "Stop laughing at me," said Emily, who was getting angry at them. John and Shane stopped laughing. John blushed, but Shane just held a smirk on his face. John looked at her and said, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to laugh, but you don't know anything about being a vampire, do you?" Emily shook her head. "Clearly not," she said. John nodded and looked over at Shane, who still had a smirk on his face. Emily raised an eyebrow at him, wanting an explanation. Since he was a vampire, he was the only one who could give the information she needed. "Well, when you're a vampire, your vision is perfect, and you can see 100 miles away from here if you train yourself to. You are a lot faster than the average person. You can run the speed of light. It would take you only an hour to run from here to London in comparison." Emily nodded, almost getting excited for being a vampire. She knew there was one downside to it. She just did not want to admit it. The only downside of being a vampire is you must earn your day-walking abilities. For food, you must drink blood. Emily frowned and looked at the ground. Shane walked over to her and lifted her head up gently. He smiled at her and said, "It will be okay. Master Aiden will help you." Emily sighed and looked at John. "Please make a portal so we can get this over with." John nodded and faced the direction of the waterfall. He held out his fingers, and silver sparks came out the tips of his fingers, creating a swirling circle. He closed his eyes and said, "Nose at Ilela." Immediately the portal opened, and Emily could see tall white building inside the portal. She looked at Shane, and then back at the portal, wondering what to do. Shane held out his hand and said, "Shall we?" Emily hesitantly grabbed his hand. She liked the soft feeling of his hand when he touched it. She didn't know why, but it was a calming touch. They faced the portal, and with no hesitation, they jumped. Emily shrieked when they entered the portal. Her whole body stung like crazy. She couldn't see anything. Silver surrounded her vision, making her unable to see her surroundings. She could feel her hair getting soaked. Emily looked over at Shane, who was the only thing she could see. She wondered why that was. Emily noticed that he seemed to be perfectly fine, like he did this all the time. It was really annoying how he always acted like that. Shane closed his eyes and held on to Emily's hand tightly. Her hand became numb, but she didn't care. She did not want to lose Shane in the portal. He was the only person she knew aside from John, who was from the other side. Emily knew that Eric was also from the other side since he turned into some strange creature. She wondered the creature he had turned into was a werewolf. He had to be a werewolf. No normal dog was ever that big and vicious. Emily noticed Shane's blonde hair become messy and damp. It hung over his face, covering his blue eyes. He didn't bother to remove it even when they were out of the portal. Both of their clothes were soaked. She noticed that their clothes were covered in silver sparkles from the portal. Silver must be the ferry train, thought Emily. Shane shook his hair, making water splash all over Emily. Even though she was already wet, Emily was annoyed. She glared at Shane, who simply smirked at her like it was nothing. Emily rolled her eyes and said, "Where are we?" Shane ran his fingers through his hair and pushed it back. He looked at her and said, "We are in a small town of my home country, Alela." Shane was speaking like he was from another century. It was so weird hearing him speak like this. She was used to the emotionless Shane, where the only emotion he showed was fear. Emily liked the fact that he was now showing emotion. It was just something she had to get used to, if he were to continue acting this way. When her and Shane looked at each other, Emily saw the red coming, wanting to suck the blue out of his eyes. Emily remembered seeing pictures about vampires' eyes that turned red when they drank blood. The more blood they drank, the redder their eyes became. She wondered how much blood Shane had drank since she had awakened. Emily also remembered when the red fully come out when he sucked on Emily's blood. She remembered feeling terrified and not knowing what to do. The only thing she did was watching him. She found it completely satisfying seeing him suck on her blood like it was a tasty smoothie. Emily now knew why vampires enjoyed the taste of blood. It was like candy, the best thing she had ever tasted. The sweet and salty taste of it mixed together perfectly. Nothing was overwhelming. Emily hated that she enjoyed the taste of blood. She did not have to get used to the taste of it. Emily wondered if it was possible to drink animal blood instead of human blood. She did not want to think of humans as animals to hunt. She'd rather hunt actual animals than humans. Emily did not like to think about killing a human. If it was possible, she wanted to avoid killing humans. She wondered if Shane drank human blood. Emily assumed that he did because of the look she saw on his face when he sucked on hers. It looked like he loved the taste. He probably hunted humans on a regular basis for food. Emily shivered at the thought of that, but there seemed to be no other explanation. Emily sighed and said, "Shane, do you drink human blood?" Shane was brushing off the water from his cloths when she asked the question. He looked at her once he was finished. Emily noticed he looked sad. Why was he sad? Emily blushed but continued to look him in the eyes. She wanted to know if he drank human blood or animal blood. However, she had a feeling that this was a sensitive subject for him. Emily wondered why that was. With his remark, though, Emily regretted asking the question. He said it so seriously, like it's something that was obvious. "Are you serious? Of course I drink human blood. What other blood would I drink?" Emily's hands began to shake. She gripped onto the side of her green t-shirt to stop them from shaking. Emily looked into his blue eyes and said as calmly as she could, "Well, when I was younger I overheard some teachers discussing the argument of some vampires drinking animal blood instead of human blood. Even though the taste was not as salty or sweet like human blood, they did it anyway so they wouldn't have to harm any humans." Shane looked at the ground and shuffled around on his feet from side to side. He looked like he was in a place of memory. He avoided her eye contact when Emily tried to look at him. She wondered why he seemed so upset. If she hurt his feelings, she did not mean to. Emily was simply curious and wanted to know more about the vampire world and if the rumors were true. Once Shane looked up at her, Emily noticed his eyes were red. However, the green was still in his eyes, which meant that he was fighting. He seemed to be struggling with something on the inside. But what was he struggling with? Emily stepped closer to him, but he held his hand, telling her to stand back. Some vampires do drink animal blood instead of human blood, but it is a very tricky process. If a vampire master found out that one of his or her vampires drinks animal blood, immediately the vampire is banished to the mundane world. Drinking animal blood is very frowned upon in the vampire community. But why? Shane shrugged his shoulders and said, "No more questions. We better get a move on otherwise. We will have to stay in my house until nighttime comes." Again, Emily nodded while Shane turned around so his back was facing Emily. Emily assumed she was supposed to get up on his back, so she did. Shane grunted and hauled her up on his back. He looked back and Emily saw John coming towards them. How did John get to the other side? Wasn't he the one who created the portal? How was it even possible he was able to jump in his own portal? Emily pushed the question aside, knowing that there were other things to worry about. She began to wonder if Master Aiden would like her. He was a vampire after all, and he was probably stronger than her. She had a feeling if he didn't like her, then he would probably kill her. Like actually kill her. Emily's shoulders jerked automatically. She shouldn't be thinking about this. It was destroying her on the inside. She had to focus on the positive. The one good thing she liked about being a vampire was that she had no more dyslexia. That was a relief. She hated her dyslexia, and how it made her learn slower than a lot of people. It made harder for her to get good grades no matter how hard she actually tried. Shane looked up at her and said, "Are you okay?" Emily nodded and said, "Yes, I was just thinking." Shane sighed and looked ahead of them. Emily looked at Shane and asked, "How far away is Master Aiden's house?" Shane looked back at her and said, "Only 11 miles. However, if we use vampire speed, it won't take long at all." Emily let out a breath and said, "What about John?" Shane laughed and said, "He'll be fine. Trust me, fairies are able to catch up with vampires real quick." Emily sighed and looked ahead. Already John was ahead of him. She was quite shocked seeing that he was already a mile ahead. Shane looked at her and said, "Ready?" Emily nodded and said, "Ready as I'll ever be." Emily gasped once they started running. She closed her eyes and felt the wind brush against her face. It made her face sting, but she didn't care. Even though she was terrified, she enjoyed the rush of the wind and the speed of vampires. Emily screamed for joy while they were running. She could hear Shane laughing from underneath her. Emily didn't care if he was laughing at her. She laughed along with him. She loved the feeling of the wind brushing against her face. It was a pleasant feeling. In no time, they stopped in front of a white house. Emily got off of Shane's back once they had stopped running. Her legs began to wobble, but Shane held onto her arms to make her not fall. She sighed in relief and looked ahead of her. The house was tall, and at the top of the house it was like a long pointed stick. At the very top she saw the David star. It was like a crown on top of a king's head. Shane walked up to the door and knocked. Emily's breathing began to quicken when the door slowly opened. She found herself staring up at a tall man. He had straight jet black hair and a nicely brushed beard. Unlike Shane, he had bright red eyes. How many humans had he fed on? Shane bowed down at him and said, "Master Aiden, I bring you a newborn who awoke a few hours ago. She lived in Nicholas Dunn's house in September 2010. She is the only one aside from her father who has marked blood." Master Aiden looked over at Emily with curiosity. He looked up and down from head to foot. He walked around her as if measuring what she was worth. Emily kept her entire eye contact on him as he studied her. She wondered why he was doing this to her. Was he trying to humiliate her? Once he and Emily were face to face, he looked over at Shane and said, "How do you know she is the marked?" When Master Aiden spoke, his front canine teeth sharpened like he wanted to bite Emily. Emily took a step back, feeling quite scared. What was he going to do? It looked like he was about to do something quite horrible. Emily was prepared to defend herself if she had to. She held her hands up, ready to fight. Shane threw his head back in frustration and walked over to Emily. He grabbed her wrist tightly and turned so that her palm was facing up. She sucked in her breath when she saw the David star on her wrist. The once black David star was now fading away into something like a scar. Hardly anyone with marked blood is able to survive the David star. If someone has marked blood and can survive this, that means they must belong to the vampires, said Shane. Master Aiden eyed the David star like it was a curse. Emily didn't know what to do at that moment. All she could do was stand there and watch them fight. She wished that they didn't fight. The only problem was that she didn't know a single thing about the vampire world. The only thing she knew was their eyesight was perfect. They had incredible speed and amazing hair. That was all she knew. Emily had also heard stories about vampires when she was a child. When she went to camp, they told stories of magical and horrifying creatures. Some had said that vampires were the most beautiful creatures anyone has ever seen. However, others think that they are the deadliest creatures. She wished that someone would just simply tell her what was going on. Master Aiden sighed and said, "You have proved your point, Shane. There are just only 2 problems that must be dealt with before she can join us." Shane raised an eyebrow at Master Aiden and said, "And what are those 2 problems?" Master Aiden turned to Emily and said, "She will need a place to stay for the first problem. She can stay at my house." "There, first problem solved? What is the second issue?" Shane sounded impatient and worried by his question. Why did he sound worried? His breathing began to quicken as he waited for Master Aiden to answer. "What was going on? Has she drunk any human blood?" Emily looked at Shane worriedly. She knew she shouldn't be so shocked by the question. All vampires drank blood. Emily was just afraid of the outcome after they had drunk the blood. Emily did not know if she had human blood or animal blood. The question was if she had drunk human blood. Emily didn't know how to answer that question. Shane nodded and said, "Yes." Master Aiden stepped towards him and said, "Has she actually hunted and sucked on a human's neck?" Shane stepped back and suddenly fell forward and got into a ball on the floor. He screamed and covered his head with his hands. Emily looked at Master Aiden and wondered what was going on. Why was Shane on the ground in pain? Master Aiden looked at Shane and said, "Did she hunt?" With a lot of effort, Shane looked up at Master Aiden and said, "No." Shane gasped and let go of his head. He crawled backwards away from Master Aiden and hid behind Emily. Emily looked at him with wide eyes, wondering what had just happened. Master Aiden wiped his hands together, looked at Emily and said, "Time to hunt." Master Aiden stepped over Shane and walked forward. Emily looked at Shane, who seemed to be passed out on the floor. Emily frowned and looked at Master Aiden. Why couldn't anyone tell her what was going on? She wished she knew more information about what was happening. Emily felt like she was always confused with everything. No one seemed to tell her anything that was happening. The excuse was that she was too young. However, depending on the information, no one could be too young. Emily hated that excuse, but it was one of those excuses that she couldn't avoid. Emily looked down at Shane and noticed he was not breathing. Of course, vampires did not breathe, but Emily still had the habit of breathing. She did not want her human habits to go away even though she was a vampire. She would just simply have to adjust. Emily felt for her pulse on her neck but soon realized that she did not have one. She sighed in frustration and put her hand back down. Master Aiden looked at her and said, "Where is your fairy friend?" Emily looked at Master Aiden and said, Shane said that he would catch up with us." Emily glanced forward and saw a boy with curly hair and huge white wings coming their way. Shane was right, Emily thought. She wondered how John managed to catch up with them. Emily thought vampires were the fastest creatures alive. However, she did remember that Shane had told her that fairies were also fast, just not as fast as vampires. John smiled at Emily, and then winked at her. Emily felt her cheeks blush and turned her head away from him. Master Aiden cleared his throat and said, "Fairy, are you able to take us to London?" John nodded and said, "I can take you anywhere you'd like." Emily raised an eyebrow at him. It seemed like John and Master Aiden were up to something. Master Aiden nodded his head and John faced forward. He closed his eyes and held out his hands. Then he said, "Nose at London." A portal appeared in front of them after he said those words. Emily was amazed how he was able to do that. She still didn't understand what Master Aiden was up to, and she was a little frightened about what his plan was. Emily glanced over at Master Aiden, who gestured for her to come over to him. Emily walked over to him and stood at his side. Master Aiden placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "Go ahead." Emily inhaled, and without any questions, she jumped in. She looked back and saw that Master Aiden jumped in right behind her. She felt something tingling in her body like the first time Emily jumped into the portal. She hated that feeling, but it was the only way to get to the other side. Emily looked behind her and saw that Ilela was gone. She disappeared once she had entered the portal. Silver sparks circled around her, making her blind. The only thing she could see was Master Aiden. Emily groaned when they were finally on level ground. She touched her head with her hand wand, and when she lifted it, she saw silver sparks on them. She also noticed that her hand was wet, so that meant her hair was damp. Emily sighed and brushed her hands on her jeans. Master Aiden let out a breath and said, "Oh, how I missed London. It has been a while since I was here. London definitely has the best blood to feed on." Emily shivered when he said that. The thought of hunting humans like they were animals horrified her. She did not want to be put in this situation, but she knew she had no choice. In order for Emily to live with the vampires she had to hunt, the other side was the only safe place for her to live. She wished there was another way, though. Emily wondered why Master Aiden brought her to London. She had always wanted to go, but not like this. She wanted to go with her family and tour all of the wonderful places in London. Now she was forced to drink someone's blood. Master Aiden looked at her and said, "I have the perfect blood for you." He walked forward and opened the door to the school. Emily looked up and saw that the title of the school was London School of Arts. Emily was thankful at that moment for her vampire sight. She could now read words clearly. Shane was right. Emily was about to walk in until she remembered something. Master Aiden laughed and said, "It's okay. You can walk in without being welcomed." Emily stepped forward and opened up the door. Inside, she saw a lot of people walking to different classrooms. Their hands were full of books, and over their shoulders were backpacks. Why were they in a school? Emily walked inside and waited for Master Aiden to walk in. Master Aiden placed his hand on Emily's shoulder and pointed to a girl with blonde hair and blue eyes. She was carrying a piano music book in her hands. Emily looked up at Master Aiden and wondered why he was pointing at her. The girl looked so familiar. Emily was scared to find out who that girl was because of how familiar she looked. She recognized the blonde hair and the bright blue eyes. Her blonde hair looked well with her olive skin tone. It seemed tanned like she was out in the sun all week. Emily looked outside and noticed the sun was up. It must be the beginning of the school day. "I want you to drink her blood," said Master Aiden. Emily nodded and slowly walked up to the girl with blonde hair. She didn't want to drink the blood. Of all people, why her? Couldn't she have drunk someone else's blood? That would have made her feel a bit better. Maybe this was a test for Emily, a test of her loyalty. Emily sighed and tapped on the girl's shoulder. The girl spun around and her eyes immediately grew wide. She looked up and down her body and then dropped her book. Emily noticed her hands were shaking like crazy. She wondered why the girl was acting like that. "Are you real?" asked the girl. Emily tilted her head to the side. "What do you mean?" asked Emily. When the girl spoke, she stuttered over her words. "I mean, you're dead. We all thought you were dead. How are you alive?" "What are you talking about?" "Emily, don't you remember me? I'm Sam, your sister." Emily sucked in a breath and looked back at Master Aiden. It was all clear now. She was supposed to kill her sister. No wonder the girl looked so familiar. She was her sister. Emily wanted to cry but knew that she couldn't do so in front of Master Aiden. Emily nodded and said, "I do now." Emily looked around the school and began to think. She wondered if she should tell Sam about her turning. She had not seen Sam in a whole year. Sam had changed a lot since Emily saw her. But so had Emily. Emily could read now and she was extremely fast. Sam. She was in college and living in London. Emily wanted to get to know her again. Emily looked at Sam and said, "Where's the bathroom?" Sam raised an eyebrow and said, It's down the hall, second room to your left." "Why?" Emily nodded, and without further explanation, she took Sam's hand and ran as fast as she could to the bathroom. In just 2 short seconds, they arrived. Sam's legs began to wobble when Emily let her go. Sam grabbed onto the counter and said, "How did you do that?" Emily paced back and forth in the bathroom and ran her hands through her hair. She quickly turned on all of the sinks and made sure the doors were closed. She couldn't let Master Aiden hear what they were saying. Emily had to tell her sister her plan. "I'm just going to come out and say it. Promise me you won't run away." Sam nodded in response. Emily thought she started to sound like Shane now. She hated herself for sounding like Shane, but she didn't want Sam to run away. Emily looked up at Sam and let out a breath before speaking. "I came here, but a man I met earlier. This is going to sound insane, but he wants me to drink your blood." "Why?" asked Sam in a shaky voice. Emily sighed and said, "Because in order to live with the others, I must drink human blood." "So get a blood bag." "I did. But he wants me to hunt an actual human and kill the person." Emily looked up at Sam, whose eyes were beginning to water. She looked like she was going to cry. Sam had every right to feel this way. This was not normal, but Emily had no choice. Emily closed her eyes and said, "I am a vampire." Sam's breathing began to quicken. She backed up to the wall away from Emily. Emily held up her hands and said, "I won't do it. However, if I don't do it, I will starve and not have a place to live." Sam frowned and tapped her chin with her fingers. She looked at Emily and said, "Why not live with me and Mom?" "Are you kidding?" "Mom would freak out if she found out I'm a vampire," said Emily. Sam shook her head and said, "No, she won't. She misses you, Em. She would do anything to get you back." Emily's legs started to shake. She had a lot of decisions to make. The first thing was she needed to stay alive. The second thing was she needed a place to live. "Do you know if there are any places that provide blood bags?" asked Emily. Sam nodded and said, "Yes, but before you can come home, you must drink some of my blood." Emily shook her head and said, "I can't. What if I can't control myself?" "You will, trust me. I can fake my death to make it appear real. I know how to control my breathing to make it look like I am dead." Emily raised an eyebrow at her. "How do you know that stuff?" "Emily, I'm getting a degree in acting." "What about the piano book?" "Oh, I'm learning piano as a hobby." Emily sighed and said, "I don't want to hurt you. It will be okay. Believe me, I am scared, but I want you to live." Emily nodded and grabbed Sam's wrist. Sam's chest rose and fell quickly when she held onto her wrist. Emily could feel her canine teeth sharpen. Emily's hands felt sweaty as she held onto Sam's wrist. She closed her eyes and without any more hesitation, she bit down onto her wrist. The taste of Sam's blood was amazing. It was the best blood she ever tasted. The salty and sweet taste flowed on her tongue like a shower. The blood was warm and smooth. It was smooth like water. Sam pulled back her hand, but Emily gripped on tighter. She wanted more of the blood. Even though her mind was telling her to stop, she couldn't will her teeth to let go. Finally, with a lot of strength, she released her teeth from Sam's wrist. Sam fell to her knees and held onto her wrist. Sam breathed heavily as she looked at Emily. Her eyes were wide with fear, but she did not run away. Emily blushed and looked the other way. "I'm sorry," Emily said in a quiet voice. Sam nodded and said, "It's okay. You can't control it yet. You should probably get back to the man before he gets mad. Tonight, meet me by the front doors of the school." Emily nodded and ran back to Master Aiden. People have said that the Dunn family had a secret. Some say it was a curse and others say it was a blessing. Whatever it was, nothing ever good happened on the day of a Dunn family member's wedding. There was a rumor going around saying that the family was marked. People had speculation that it was the mark of witchcraft that ran in their family. Everyone thought the reason Ardon never showed up to anything was because he was ashamed of his family. No one knew why, and no one bothered to ask. The town was buzzing with excitement on the day of the eldest Dunn daughter's wedding. The Dunns have always held the best parties because they were rich. When it came to the Dunns hosting a party, everyone seemed to forget about the secret they held. At the parties, people drank wine and were cheerful with each other. It was helpful that their grandfather, Ardon, never showed up because otherwise people would have left and no one would have had a good time. Sarah stared into the mirror of her vanity while she waited for the wedding to start. She was in a beautiful wedding dress that hung over her feet. Her hair was braided up into a bun, which made her blue eyes shine brighter. Sarah wondered if her grandfather would show. She hoped that he wouldn't come, even though she had sent an invitation to him. There was something about her grandfather that seemed to bring chaos everywhere he went. Sarah did not want him to ruin her wedding. Arden hated her fiancé James, who was 22 years old and had a well-paid writing job. He had dark black hair, chocolate brown eyes, and tanned skin. He graduated from the college New York University and continued the love of writing. He eventually got published and was on his break and was ready to marry Sarah. James had done nothing wrong to Arden, but for some reason he hated James. Arden knew that James would be a fine man to marry because he was rich. However, they never seemed to get along. Sarah turned her head when she heard a knock on the door. Sarah frowned when she saw who it was. "You came," she said. Her grandfather laughed and said, I wouldn't want to miss my granddaughter's wedding now, would I? Sarah gave him a small smile and turned to face herself in the mirror. In the mirror, she saw Ardan coming towards her with a gift in his hand. She was curious about the gift, so she turned around and faced him. She hated seeing him, but since it was her wedding, she decided this would be the only time she would ever see him. Sarah hated Ardan after what he did to her mom, which got her killed. Her father also hated him and forced him to stay away from their family. Ardan set the gift down on Sarah's lap and said, I am old now and will be dying very soon. It should have been a sad moment for Sarah, but it wasn't. She was quite happy with her grandfather dying. He had been alive for too long and had done terrible things to her and her family. Even though he was family, she couldn't help but hate him. As a gift to you and your fiancé, I will be giving you my mansion. This house has been passed down in our family for generations. I won't leave it alone. I passed it down to your father, but he refused, so I am passing it down to you. Sarah nodded, feeling afraid of what Ardan might do to her if she didn't accept it. Ardan pulled out a golden key with the initials ND on it and gave it to her. He then bowed and left another word. Sarah let out a breath and set the package down on top of the vanity. She did not want to open in fear of what might happen. Her grandfather was always a mysterious man who never shared any information about his past. The people of New York did not trust him. They in fact had wanted to kill him in the past, but decided not to. Sarah jumped when she heard a knock at the door. She turned around and said, Come in. Her friend Gail Ross came in and said, It is time. Sarah sighed and stepped away from the vanity. She smiled at Gail and walked out of the room, not looking back.